make sure we're recording, okay? So we'd like to start off by greeting and saluting everyone in the name of Ahaya B'Hashem Yeshaya, Wal Rawak Kodash, which is the Most High Ahaya, in the name of Christ and the Holy Spirit. We welcome you to this Sabbath lesson in a continuation of a 12-week project highlighting the history of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. Last week we left off with the tribe of Benjamin, who we identified according to the Bible as well as history as the so-called Jamaicans and the predominant number of West Indian islanders. Also, I would like to mention on Benjamin, for those who have been wondering, who've been having questions concerning the other peoples outside of Jamaica, concerning who they are as far as identity. Do they also link to the tribe of Benjamin? Well, next week we're going to go into a lesson in which we're going to round off the other tribes in the West Indian Islands, such as Suriname, Guyana, and all those other areas within the Caribbean islands that also link to Benjamin. So we're going to do a continuation of Benjamin next week. This week, we're going to pick up with Ephraim and Manasah. Ephraim and Manasah. And believe it or not, when we're talking about Ephraim and Manasah in the western hemisphere of the earth, we're also talking about the Caribbean islanders, the peoples of the Caribbean. We're going to find out that the children of Ephraim and Manasah, before the tribe of Benjamin and Levi made their way over into the New World, were the original inhabitants of the Caribbean. So we're going to touch on some of that. But before we get into some of the secular history, we're first going to start off with the biblical history. You're going to find out today, as well as in the past weeks, you've been finding out that the history of the people who we call the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel, beginning with the so-called African American, beginning with the so-called Haitian and the so-called Jamaican and West Indian, their history does not start with the slave ships. They have a rich history which goes back thousands of years, beginning with the Bible. So when we talk about African American history, when we talk about Haitian history, when we talk about Jamaican and West Indian history, when we talk about the Puerto Rican and the Cuban history, we're talking about biblical history. Okay? So let's start off in the Bible with Ephraim and Manasah. Okay? And we're going to start off in the book of Genesis, the 30th chapter, because we know that Ephraim and Manasah are descendants of which of the 12 tribes? Of which fathers did they come from? Joseph, right. Okay, Joseph. So let's start off with the birth of Joseph, the father of both Ephraim and Manasah. And then we're going to go into the birth of Ephraim and Manasah, where they were born, or the location of where they were born, as well as when they were born. Okay? So in the book of Genesis, and we're going to go to chapter 30. Yes, sir. Genesis 30 and 24. All right? We're going to give you all time to get there along with us. In fact, you can start at verse 22. Genesis 30 and 22.
Genesis chapter 30, verse 22. And the Most High remembered Rachel, and the Most High hearkened to her and opened her womb.
So it says God remembered Rachel. So we know that Rachel is the mother of Joseph. Okay. In the past weeks, we've been covering children of Leah. Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Or Judah and Levi are children of Leah, and Benjamin is a son of Rachel. Okay? Go ahead.
Verse 23. And she conceived and bare a son, and said, the Most High have taken away my reproach.
So when they bore a son, she said, the Most High have taken away my reproach. So we can see the idea and the concept of bringing forth children in the earth was an idea of joy, relief from grief and stress. Whereas today it's the total opposite. Having a child is a time of mourning. It's depressive. Okay? But back then, when these women, both Rachel and Leah, bore children, they said what? God had taken away my reproach. Okay? And there's many examples of this with the birth of the 12 tribes. How they actually welcomed the idea of having children. Because they felt that the more children they had, the more Jacob would endear his love to them. That was the mindset back then. But today, it's a total contrast. But that's a whole other lesson for another day, right?
Verse 24. And she called his name Joseph.
So she called his name Joseph, which in ancient Hebrew is Rawchaa, but in modern Hebrew is Yosef. Go ahead.
And said, the Most High shall add to me another son.
She said that the Most High shall add to me another son. So that gives us the definition for the meaning of Joseph. It means he shall add. Okay? He shall add. Go ahead.
Verse 25. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, send me away, that I may go unto mine own place, and to my country.
Right. Okay? So after Rachel bore Joseph, Jacob now asked Laban, the father of Rachel, to send him to his country, the country of his father's inheritance, which was the land of Canaan. Okay? Now let's go into the sons of Joseph in the book of Genesis, the 41st chapter. Now, who are the two sons of Joseph, if anyone can remember? Manasah and Ephraim, right? Who was the firstborn? Manasah was the firstborn, right? Okay? And I'm going to ask that question because later we're going to clear up why Ephraim is identified and magnified and recognized as the firstborn. Even though he was secondborn, Ephraim would receive a blessing later, in which he would be recognized as Jacob's or Joseph's firstborn. Okay? We're in the book of Genesis chapter 41, and let's start at verse 52. Uh, 51, Lawya. Genesis chapter 41, verse 51. And just to give some background history as to how we end up in Genesis, the 41st chapter, many of us are familiar, we should all be familiar with the story of Joseph and how he was sold into Egypt. Okay? Does anyone remember that? Does anyone remember the history of Joseph and how he made his way into Egypt? Okay? So, before we get there, let's go back a few verses. Forgive me here. Let's go back to the book of Genesis, the 37th chapter. Genesis 37, verse 3, because this is going to offer some background history as to how Joseph was sold. And I'm going to allow you all to pick up the pieces, right? So this is Genesis chapter 37, verse 3. Go ahead.
Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children.
Right, so who is Israel? Jacob, right. So how did he receive the name Israel? He wrestled with the angel, right? The angel gave him a blessing and said what? Anyone remember? Let's get the scripture on when Jacob wrestled the angel. Okay? Let's go to the book of Genesis, chapter 38. Okay, in fact, let's jump over a few chapters. 32, Lawya. Genesis, the 32nd chapter. And let's start at verse 28. Genesis 32 and 28.
And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel.
But Israel, go ahead.
For as a prince hast thou power with the Most High.
For as a prince hast thou power with the Most High. Go ahead.
And with men, and hast prevailed.
And hast prevailed. So that gives us the definition of the name Jacob. Jacob means to have power, or to be a prince of the power, or a prince of the Most High. So all of the children of Jacob would have that same position and title in the earth. We are the children of Israel. Who is Israel? Our father. Okay? How did he receive the name Israel? He wrestled with the angel. What does Israel mean? To be a prince of the power. That is our position as a nation. So when you look at all the tribes that we've covered thus far, beginning with Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, they are all children of Israel, meaning they are children of God, children of the power, okay, or princes of the power, okay? So let's go down to the book of Genesis 37 and 3.
Genesis chapter 37, verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children.
So we know Israel is Jacob. Go ahead.
Because he was the son of his old age.
So it says that Joseph, or that Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children. So out of all the 12 tribes and all the 12 sons that were born of Jacob, his love was bestowed upon Joseph. He had favor with his father Jacob. Go ahead.
Because he was the son of his old age.
Because Joseph was the son of his old age. So before Benjamin, Joseph was initially the youngest son of Jacob. Go ahead.
And he made him a coat of many colors.
And he made him a coat of many colors. This is one of the most memorable events in Israelite history pertaining to Joseph. Usually when you think of Joseph, you think of one or two things. His time in Egypt, and you think of his coat of many colors. Okay, go ahead.
And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him.
So they were jealous of Joseph. Why? Because Jacob bestowed his love upon Joseph. So all the sons had some type of envious jealousy and hatred towards Joseph. Go ahead.
And could not speak peaceably unto him.
And they could not speak peaceably unto him. Anytime they conversed with Joseph, it ended in contention and strife. Okay? The same way a jealous relationship takes place now. When people are jealous of each other, they find ways to bicker and argue. That's what the sons did to Joseph. Go ahead.
Verse 5. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more.
So because Joseph had the ability to dream, the Most High blessed him with the gift to see visions. The brethren hated him even more. So their jealousy for him grew because of this spiritual ability. Go ahead.
Verse 6. And he said unto them, Hear I pray you this dream which I have dreamed.
Go ahead.
For behold.
So this ain't like the dream that we covered the other week with Martin Luther King and all the other civil rights leaders. This was a dream that was inspired by God himself. Okay? So when you read this and Joseph says, I have dreamed a dream, don't think about Martin Luther King Jr. and the stuff we covered the other week. This is a spiritual dream which was revealed by the Most High Power. Go ahead.
For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us?
Right, so they were peeved at Joseph, for lack of a better term, right? Because according to this vision, it says that his sheaf would be greater than the sheaf of his brethren. So his brethren said, are you saying that you're going to reign over us? Are you saying that you're going to be better than us? Go ahead.
Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us?
Are you going to have dominion over us? Now see, the brethren at this time didn't understand the dream that was being shown to Joseph. They didn't understand that in a later event in history that Joseph would reign over them and that he would have dominion over them. Go ahead.
And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words.
So his dreams only made the brethren hate him more and more. Go ahead.
Verse 9. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him.
So his father rebuked him. Jacob, or at this time whose name was changed to Israel, rebuked Joseph for this vision. Why? Because Joseph himself didn't understand the purpose of this vision. Okay? So when he initially heard it, he rebuked Joseph. Go ahead.
What is this? And said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed?
So Jacob asked Joseph, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? What do you mean that the sun and the moon and the 11 stars will bow down unto you? What is the purpose of this? Are you saying that myself and your brethren will bow down unto you? Are you saying that you're going to be greater than your father Jacob? Go ahead.
Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the same.
Now his brother initially envied him. They used what Jacob said against Joseph as more firepower and more reason to hate Joseph. See, I told you he was off. See, even Dad figured it out, right? But Jacob later sat down and he observed, and he marveled upon it. He said, "Man, what does this mean? What does he mean that the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars will bow down unto him?" Okay, that was the wisdom of our father Jacob. Go ahead. Now keep in mind that this is the history of the father of the Ephraimites and the Manassites, who we're going to identify according to history and as well as the Bible as the so-called Puerto Ricans and the Cubans. This is the history of your father Joseph. All right? And I say that to say this, that your history goes back long before your colonization in the Americas. Okay? Your history goes way back farther than you can imagine. Okay? Joseph is your father. That's a deep saying in itself. To be able to identify Joseph, this great individual in the Bible, as your forefather. Okay? Go ahead.
Verse 12. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem.
Now we're going to go past this story. I'm pretty sure you all can fill in the blanks of this record of how he went to go, or the brethren went to go feed the flocks. Right? Exactly. Later, Jacob sent Joseph to go check on the brethren with the flocks. The brethren saw Joseph coming with this coat of many colors, and before he came, they conspired and said that this is our opportunity to slay our brother Joseph. We can do away with him at this moment and never again have to worry about this child. We don't have to worry about him, his dreams, or his coat of many colors. We can deal with him right now at this instant. Later, it was Reuben, if I'm not mistaken, who later came and said, well, listen, let's not kill him. Let's not totally murder him. Let's come up with another plan. So the second plan was what?
To sell him.
Initially, they did what? What did they do with this coat of many colors?
They made it seem like the animal killed.
They made it seem like he was killed by an animal. Right. And they put the blood of the animal on the coat of many colors. They took it back to Jacob. And initially, they put Joseph in a pit. Right? They put him in a pit. And then later, they said, well, listen, they saw some, I believe it was Midianites who came, and they saw the Midianites. They sold him to the Midianites. The Midianites later went into Egypt. And the Midianites sold him to an Egyptian whose name was Potiphar, the priest of On. Okay? So that's just a quick story of Joseph. And we know that initially when he was sold to Potiphar, priest of On, Potiphar had a wife. His wife tried to do what to Joseph?
Seduce him.
She tried to seduce him. Right. Joseph wasn't going for it. Okay? Joseph was a man of virtuosity and chastening. So he stood his ground, but because he stood his ground, the woman decided that she would call out, I guess in this society you would say rape, right? As a way of getting Joseph detained. And later Joseph was placed in a dungeon in the land of Egypt. Now in this dungeon is where Joseph really got his claim to fame in Egypt, showing you that even from your lowest estate, the Most High can raise you up to something great. Okay? He was in a dungeon with no hope. And there was a situation in which you had both a baker, I forget the other occupation of the other individual. I believe, yeah, a wine presser. Okay? So you had two individuals, and Joseph gave a vision based on these two individuals. Okay? Now, to make a long story short, when Joseph gave forth this vision, he began to have favor with the Pharaoh of Egypt. Later, Joseph had a vision in which, where he was able to interpret the vision of the Pharaoh of the 7 years of plenteous and the 7 years of famine. After Joseph was able to interpret this dream according to the Most High's interpretation, not according to his interpretation, but according to the Most High's interpretation, the Pharaoh then decided to raise him into second in command over Egypt. Okay? So he became the vizier over the land of Egypt. So once Joseph was raised up to this position, which we're going to read, he later had 2 sons. And when he had these 2 sons, he named them Ephraim and Manasah for a purpose. And we're going to get that purpose out of the Bible. But let's go to the book of Genesis 41, and we're going to start at verse 20. Let's see here. 41. In fact, let's jump down to 38. 41 and 38.
Genesis chapter 41, verse 38. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of the Most High is?
You see that? So even the Pharaoh acknowledged that Joseph had the Spirit of the Most High God, which means that Pharaoh knew that his gods were worthless, and that the Spirit that was in Joseph was the Spirit of the true God. And it was that true God, or the Spirit of the true God that was in Joseph, that allowed him to interpret that vision properly. Correct?
Verse 39. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Forasmuch as the Most High hath showed thee all this.
So we said God had showed thee all this, not Ra, or Isis, or Osiris, or I don't care what names you call them. They're all false gods and false deities. The Pharaoh understood that it was the God of the Hebrews that revealed the information unto Joseph, not his gods. Okay? Correct?
There is none so discreet and wise as thou art.
So based on the Spirit of God that is in you, there is none that's so wise and discreet as you are. Now we thought that the Egyptians had all the wisdom and the knowledge and the understanding. But Pharaoh acknowledged that the God of the Hebrews revealed unto Joseph the true wisdom and the true knowledge that allowed him to be able to interpret the dream. And that interpretation allowed him to now gather and store corn and produce so that they could survive for the 7 years of famine. Okay? So this was a lifesaver for the Pharaoh. Go ahead. And the people of Egypt. Go ahead.
Verse 40. Thou shalt be over my house.
So he placed Joseph. Remember, this is the father of the so-called Puerto Ricans and the Cubans. He placed Joseph, your father, over his house. Go ahead.
And according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled.
So according to your word shall all my people be ruled. So Egypt was ruled by the word of Joseph. Go ahead.
Only in the throne will I be greater than thou.
So only in the throne will I be greater than thou. Of course, because I'm the Pharaoh, I'm the king, I have more power than you. But whatever you say is what goes in Egypt. Okay? You are the spiritual guidance of this land. Okay? Go ahead.
Verse 41. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt.
Go ahead.
And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck.
Now remember that before this time, Joseph was where? He was in a dungeon. He's being taken out of a dungeon, out of raggedy clothes, right? Filthy. And now he's being placed in a position in which he has what? He has a gold ring, vestures of fine linen, and what else?
A gold chain about his neck.
And he put a gold chain about his neck. So you thought that that style of gold chain was new. Okay? They were doing the same thing in Egypt. When Joseph became ruler of Egypt, he also put the gold chain about his neck. Okay? And I hear some people break it down with philosophy, the gold chain that represents slavery. No, it don't represent slavery. Okay? We were wearing gold chains back in Egypt, and we wore chains in Israel. Read the book of Ezekiel, the 34th chapter, where the Most High speaks about the great clothing and the great jewels that he placed upon his people, one of which was a chain of gold. Okay? It represents royalty. Okay? Regalness, not slavery. Go ahead.
Verse 43. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt.
So Joseph became the ruler over all the land of Egypt. Go ahead.
And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt.
Exactly. Go ahead.
And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath Pa'anaha, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt.
So now we see Joseph in a state of regalness in rulership over the land of Egypt. Okay? Now we're going to jump down to the birth of his sons, starting in the book of Genesis chapter 41, verse 51. Go ahead.
And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasah.
So remember, Manasseh was the firstborn. In Hebrew, Manasseh is Manasah. Manasah, which means made to forget. So what was Joseph made to forget in the land of Egypt once he was raised up to his position? Go ahead.
For the Most High said, He hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house.
He hath made me to forget all my toil and all my father's house. So based on that, he named his firstborn son Manasseh or Manasah, which means made to forget. Go ahead.
Verse 52. And the name of the second called he Ephraim.
Ephraim, which in Hebrew is Ephraim. Go ahead.
For the Most High have caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction.
Because the Most High caused me to be fruitful in the land of my what?
Affliction.
In the land of my affliction. So Ephraim means I am fruitful. Ephraim. Why? Because God caused Joseph to be fruitful in the land of his affliction. So the names of the sons of Jacob had meaning, true meaning. Okay? And I want to make this disclaimer also. The true name of the so-called Puerto Ricans and Cuban is not Puerto Rican and Cuban. Okay? Those are false names. Your true name is Ephraim, meaning I am fruitful, and Manasah, meaning made to forget. Those are your true biblical names and your identities. Okay? Anything else is a slave name. Anything else is a Gentile name. All right? Now, moving on to the promises that were promised unto Ephraim and Manasah. Let's go to the book of Genesis chapter 49, and we're going to read verse 22.
Genesis chapter 49, verse 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall.
Right? Whose branches run over the wall, meaning he's fruitful. When it says your branches run over the wall, it's speaking about a vine that makes its way over a wall. You ever seen a vine, a fruit vine, in which the fruit vine is growing on one side, but then you'll start to see the vine and the fruit making its way to the other side and hanging on the outside of the wall. All right? Any of you have ever seen anything like that or anything of that effect? But that's basically what Jacob is using to describe his son Joseph. His fruit is so prosperous that it began to make their way over the wall. Okay? That just means he has many children. Go ahead.
Verse 23. The archers have sorely grieved him.
The archers have sorely grieved him. We're going to get the history of the archers that grieved him. Go ahead.
And shot at him and hated him.
They shot at him and hated him, even so much that they decimated the population of Ephraim and Manasah in the New World. Speaking about the conquistadors. We're going to get their history later in this segment. Go ahead.
But his bow, a bow in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty power of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, even by the power of thy father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under thee, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors, unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren.
So these are all the blessings that will come upon Joseph and his children. And it says, upon the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. You remember that Joseph was separated from his brethren when? When he was sold to go into the land of Egypt. Okay? Is that it on Joseph there? Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 13.
Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 13. And of Joseph he said, blessed of the Most High power be his land.
Blessed of the Most High power, Ahaya, be his land. So we know that the land of Joseph would be a blessed land. Go ahead.
For the precious things of heaven.
For the precious things of heaven. His land would be precious. Okay? Based on the blessing from heaven. Go ahead.
For the dew and for the deep that coucheth beneath.
Go ahead.
And for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun.
And for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun. And we look at both the lands of Cuba and Puerto Rico. These lands are blessed with precious fruits. Okay, it's a very beautiful land, blessed with very tropical and exotic fruits, and it's a very exotic region of the earth. Okay, speaking about the land of both Ephraim and Manasah. Go ahead.
And for the precious things put forth by the moon.
Go ahead.
And for the chief things of the ancient mountains, and for the precious things of the lasting hills, and for the precious things of the earth, and fullness thereof, and for the good will of him that dwelt in the bush. Let the blessings come upon the head of Joseph, and upon the top of the head of him that was separated from his brethren.
Exactly. Now, when you go into this book here, American Holocaust, and when they go into the history of when the conquistadors and the conquerors made their way into the Americas, they detail that the lands that they came across, the lands of California and North America, the lands of Mexico and the different lands of South America and the Caribbean islands, including the lands of Puerto Rico and Cuba, that these places seemed like paradises compared to what they had in Europe. Okay? These places were like heaven on earth when the conquerors came and experienced not only the natural things such as the fruits and the proportion of the land and the beauty of the sea and the beauty of the island, even the people themselves, they said, were highly civilized. And they had systems of high civilization. They weren't living like wild baboons in the jungle. They were a highly civilized people. They had marketplaces. They had beautiful clothing. They had high art, fashion. Okay? They had all the things that were needed to run a civilized society and more. Okay? Now this is mainly going into the region of North America, but I'm going to read this because we know that this existed amongst all the tribes that made their way over to the Americas. Okay? Now I want to get this here before Columbus. You can start here. Now, this is mainly in South America. Tenochtitlan, which I believe was the Mayans, a Mayan city in South America. But again, we know that this type of civilization existed amongst all of the tribes in the Western world, who had made their way to the Western world. Okay?
And moreover.
Go ahead. Moreover.
This is on page 4 of American Holocaust. Moreover, according to Hernando Cortez.
Now, Hernando Cortez was one of the conquistadors. And he's recognized as the chief and the first conquistador in the Americas. Okay? Conquistador basically means conqueror. Okay? Or conquest. Go ahead.
One of the first Europeans to set eyes upon it. It was far and away the most beautiful city on earth.
They said it was the most beautiful city on earth. Go ahead.
The name of this magnificent metropolis was Tenochtitlan.
Tenochtitlan, which is part of the either the Mayas or the Incas civilization in their empire. Okay, go ahead.
It stood majestic and radiant in the crisp, clean air, 72 100 feet above sea level, connected to the surrounding mainland by 3 wide causeways that had been built across miles of open water. To view Tenectalan,
So they had crossways built over miles of water. Okay, go ahead.
to view Tenectalan from a distance, all who had the opportunity to do so agreed was breathtaking.
They said it was breathtaking. Anyone who was able to view this city, and again, this is not Ephraim and Manasah in general, but again, this is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And we're just giving you an example of how their lands in the New World were like paradises to those who came over from Europe. Okay? And this is helping us bring forth a picture of what the Bible talks about concerning the land of Joseph and how it brought forth precious things. Go ahead.
Before arriving at the great central city, travelers from afar had to pass through the densely populated, seemingly infinite surrounding lands, and already, invariably, they were overwhelmed. Wrote Cortes' famous companion and chronicler, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, of their visit to one of the provincial cities at the confluence of Lake Chalco and Lake, what's that,
Communical.
Yeah.
Where?
When we entered the city of Iztapalapa, the appearance of the palaces in which they housed us, how spacious and well built they were.
Read that again.
When we entered the city of Iztapalapa.
So there were cities, not just jungles. All right? And I say that because they try to convince you that when they went over into the Americas, these people needed to be civilized. That's part of the story of why they did the horrendous things that they did to the people that were in the Americas. But according to history, it states that they had cities, and within these cities they had what?
The appearance of the palaces
of the palaces, so they had palaces, go ahead.
In which they housed us, how spacious and well built they were.
And not only were they palaces, these palaces weren't little mud huts, okay, and teepees. These were big, huge palaces, and they said that when they went inside of these palaces, they were so spacious. Okay? Remember, this is supposed to be the same guys who broke the civilization. Okay? Go ahead.
Of beautiful stonework.
Of beautiful stonework, go ahead.
And cedar wood.
And cedar wood, that was one of the most prominent woods that was used in the Bible for construction. Okay? Solomon's temple used cedar's wood. I believe parts of the tabernacle used cedar wood. Okay? Go ahead.
And the wood of other sweet-scented trees.
And the wood of other sweet-scented trees. Okay, go ahead.
With great rooms and courts, wonderful to behold, covered with awnings of cotton cloth. When we had looked well at all of this, we went to the orchard and gardens, which was such a wonderful thing to see and walk in.
So they had orchards and gardens, which were walk-in gardens. So they had to construct them in which you can actually walk around. I'm pretty sure you've seen modern examples of this, in which there's huge gardens, and with the gardens you have pathways that lead you into different sections of the garden. Go ahead.
That I was never tired of looking at the diversity of the trees and noting the scent with which each one had.
So he said he was never tired. He never grew weary of identifying the different trees and their smells. There were so many. Go ahead.
And the paths full of roses and flowers.
And the paths were full of roses and flowers. Now remember, these are supposed to be savages on the other side of the earth before the Europeans came. Go ahead.
And the native fruit trees and native roses, and the pond of fresh water. There was another thing to observe, that great canoes were able to pass into the garden from the lake through an opening that had been made so that there was no need for their occupants to land. And all were cemented and very splendid with many kinds of stone monuments with pictures on them, which gave much to think about. Then the birds,
they had pictures, they had art. Go ahead.
Then the birds of many kinds and breeds which came into the pond, I say again that I stood looking at it and thought that never in the world would there be discovered lands such as these.
So he said, never in the world have I thought that land would be discovered such as these. This is how beautiful the lands were before the destroyers came. I have to say the destroyers because look at the Americas now. Okay? None of this stuff we talking about exists, at least the parts that we can access. Okay? The people who supposedly broke the civilization, if you want to call it a civilization, are responsible for the most destructive works in history. Okay? Some of the most destructive works in history in which these things that we're reading about no longer even exist. Okay? Creatures have went extinct. Trees have been, and forests have been destroyed and cut down by the Europeans that made their way over to the Americas. Okay? Now there's much, much more that you can read about in this book concerning the state of the Americas before the conquerors came. Okay? But we're going to go back into the Bible and we're going to detail how Ephraim and Manasah made their way over into the Americas. And this story, believe it or not, is some of the unpleasant history of the 12 tribes of Israel. We're going to start off with Solomon, and we're not going to read the whole story of Solomon because we went into the whole story of Solomon last week. But what we are going to do is we're going to go into the prophecy of how the kingdom was split and rendered from Solomon and how that prophecy came to pass later in 1 Kings, the 12th chapter. Okay? So we're going to start in 1 Kings 11. First Kings, the 11th chapter, and we're going to start at verse, let's see here. We're going to start at verse 31. In fact, we're going to start at verse 26. 1 Kings 11 and 26.
And Jeroboam, the son of Nebatan, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite, Ephrathite, of Zerida, Solomon's servant, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow woman, even he lifted up his hand against the king.
So the Most High made it to where Jeroboam, who was a servant of King Solomon, initially a servant of King Solomon, later rebelled against Solomon. It would be the same Jeroboam who would go and begin what is called the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay? Go ahead.
Verse 27. And this was the cause that he lifted up his hand against the king.
So this is the reason why Jeroboam rebelled against King Solomon. Go ahead.
Solomon built Millo and repaired the breaches of the city of David his father. And the man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor.
So Jeroboam was a great warrior. Go ahead.
And Solomon, seeing the young man that he was industrious, he made him ruler over all the charge of the house of Joseph.
So everything that had to do with the children of Joseph or the house of Joseph, Solomon placed Jeroboam over those, over that particular part of his kingdom, okay? Or that area of his kingdom to deal with the things that pertain to Joseph. Okay, go ahead.
And it came to pass at that time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem that the prophet Ahijah and the Shilonite found him in the way and he had clad himself with a new garment.
So Jeroboam clad himself with a new garment. Go ahead.
And they too were alone in the
So
field.
both Ahijah and Jeroboam are alone in the field. Go ahead.
And Ahijah caught the new garment that was on him, and rent it in 12 pieces.
So he snatched the garment from Jeroboam, and he rent this garment into 12 pieces. The 12 pieces representing what? The 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. Go ahead.
Verse 31. And he said to Jeroboam, take thee 10 pieces, for thus saith the Most High, the power of Israel. Behold, I will rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give 10 tribes to thee.
So the Most High, through the prophet Ahijah, told Ahijah to take 10 pieces of this garment and to give 10 pieces unto Jeroboam. And this represented that the 10 tribes of Israel, which would later be known as the northern kingdom, would now be under the authority of Jeroboam. Go ahead.
Verse 32. But he shall have one tribe for my servant David's sake.
There would be one tribe for David's sake, that one tribe being the tribe of Judah. But as we proved last week, Judah was joined with both who? Benjamin and Levi. Benjamin later, after they got over the stint of warring with Judah, initially after the kingdom was taken from Saul and given to David, there were wars and strife between Judah and Benjamin. But after those wars died down, Benjamin later strengthened the house of Judah and became part of the house of Judah in the southern kingdom. Later, when Jeroboam took control of the northern kingdom of Israel, he excommunicated all the Levites from executing the priest's office in the northern kingdom. And he set up his own priests who were false priests. So all the Levites eventually went into the southern kingdom, along with Judah and Benjamin. And that became the southern kingdom of the nation of Israel. Okay? So that's how you got the 10 tribes under Jeroboam and the 3 tribes under Judah. And if you remember, Levi was initially not a tribe. He was the priest. Okay? Later, Dan no longer was a part of the tribes, and Levi took his place, making it 12 tribes. Okay? Go ahead.
But he shall have one tribe.
He shall have one tribe. Go ahead.
For my servant David's sake.
So for David's sake, I will keep one tribe in the land of Jerusalem. Now, what was the promise that God made with David that caused the Most High to keep the one tribe in Judea? Exactly. Through the loins of David would the Savior come. So in order to maintain that promise, Judah had to remain in the southern kingdom. Okay? To fulfill the promise that was given to King David. Okay? Go ahead.
And for Jerusalem's sake, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel.
So out of all the tribes of Israel, the Most High chose Jerusalem. That's where he placed the temple. That's where all the tribes would come to celebrate the 3 holy days which needed a pilgrimage. Okay? So no matter where you were in the land of Israel, when it came to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is the Passover, when it came to the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles, and when it came to the Feast of Ingathering, you had to be present in the land of Jerusalem. Okay, go ahead.
Verse 33. Because that they have forsaken me, and have worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians.
Go ahead.
Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of the children of Ammon, and have not walked in my ways to do that which is right in mine eyes, and to keep my statutes and my judgments, as did David his father.
34, go ahead.
Howbeit I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand.
He says, howbeit However, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hands. Go ahead.
But I will make him prince all the days of his life for David, my servant's sake.
But I will make him prince all the days of his life for David, my servant's sake. So for David's sake, I'm going to allow him to continue to rule. Go ahead.
Whom I choose, because he kept my commandments and my statutes.
Because David kept the commandments and the statutes. Right? Go ahead.
But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand.
It says, I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand. Whose son? He says, I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand. Whose son? Solomon's son. Whose name was what? Not Jeroboam. Rehoboam. Right. Right. Go ahead.
And will give it unto thee, even 10 tribes.
Even 10 tribes. Go ahead.
And unto his son will I give 1 tribe, that David my servant may have a life always before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen me to put my name there.
Right. Let's jump over to chapter 12 to see how this was fulfilled. And then we're going to go into how those tribes later went into captivity. And through that captivity, they now sought to move into a new land. And from that new land, we're now going to go into some of the secular history of both Ephraim and Manasah. Okay? And now let's go to the book of 1 Kings chapter 12. And let's read verse 21. Now to make a long story short, when you go back and read the story, Rehoboam now took over the kingship after Solomon passed on. So Rehoboam was faced with a decision. All the men that reigned with Solomon, his father, told Rehoboam to lay off the people. Okay, be easy upon the people. Okay, be liberal. Then you had the young men who were raised with Rehoboam. And the young men that were raised with Rehoboam convinced him to be harder upon the people, even harder than Solomon, his father, specifically upon the northern tribes. So instead of Rehoboam listening to the counsel of the older men, the wiser men, he instead listened to the counsel of the younger men. And because of that counsel, it caused the prophecy to come to pass. Okay? A rift took place between the northern and the southern kingdom. When the northern kingdom went back up into the north of Israel, they said, listen, we have no inheritance with the sons of David. Jeroboam, seeing this as an opportunity, later came in and decided to use this to now take control of the northern tribes. But the way he did it was off. We know it was according to prophecy, but the way he did it was off. And we're going to read how he did it. Let's jump down straight to the point, verse 25.
1 Kings chapter 12, verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in Mount Ephraim, and dwelt therein, and went out from thence, and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David.
So he says, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. The house of David being the southern kingdom, Judah. So in order to prevent the northern tribes, 10 tribes, from returning to the house of David, he came up with a plan. What was this plan? Go ahead.
Verse 27. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Most High at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord.
So if they go down to Jerusalem to sacrifice, eventually their heart will be turned back to the Lord. And they're going to go back and connect with the house of David. Go ahead.
Even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah.
Right, they're going to be up under Rehoboam. Go ahead.
And they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam, king of Judah.
So there will be no use for me, is what Jeroboam is saying. So because there's no longer a use for me, they will kill me and return back unto Rehoboam, king of Judah. Go ahead.
Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold.
So he took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. These are the same calves, yes, I said calves, that we worship coming out of Egypt. Remember, when they worshiped the calves, they said what? These be thy gods, G-O-D-S, that delivered you out of the land of Egypt. So there were 2 calves coming out of the land of Egypt. Jeroboam erected these same calves in order to prevent the northern tribes from returning to the southern kingdom under the house of David. Go ahead.
Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel.
So he said, it's too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Y'all got to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year. You got to go there. You got to worry about your family, your sacrifices. Why not just worship up here? Here's the gods that delivered you out of the land of Egypt. You can stay in the comfortability of this land, of your vicinity. You can bring your sacrifices right here. You don't have to go to Jerusalem no more. Just recognize these calves as the gods that delivered you out of Egypt. Okay? Go ahead.
Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set the one in Bethel.
So he set one in Bethel, which is the most southern extremity of the northern kingdom. Go ahead.
And the other put he in Dan.
And he put the other in Dan, which is the most northern extremity of the territory of the northern kingdom. Go ahead.
And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan.
Right. Go ahead.
And he made an house of high places, and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi.
So he brought in priests, which were of the lowest sort of the people, which were not of the tribes of Levi. So when he did this, he told all the Levites, hey, y'all got to get out of here. Y'all can no longer execute the priest office in the northern kingdom. You must leave. So the Levites then went to the southern kingdom, because their services were no longer needed amongst Jeroboam's kingdom. Go ahead.
Verse 32. And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that is in Judah. And he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. So he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel the 15th day of the 8th month, even in the month which he had devised of his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel. And he offered upon the altar and burned incense.
Right. So not only did he set up his own priests, he set up his own holy days to worship these false gods. Okay? Now let's go to the book of Hosea 11 and 12. Hosea 11. In fact, let's get Hosea. Let me get this here. It tells us that Ephraim departed. Ephraim departed from the Lord. You heard? Hosea 11 and 12, Salaka. The book of Hosea 11 verse 12. Correct?
Chapter 1?
11 and 12.
11 and 12.
Chapter 11 verse 12, correct?
Ephraim compasseth me about with
So
lies.
the Bible says, Ephraim compasseth me about with lies. Ephraim became a nation of liars. And when it says Ephraim, it's speaking about the whole 10 tribes. Because Ephraim, or Joseph, was the head of the 10 tribes. Go ahead.
And the house of Israel with deceit.
And the house of Israel, the northern kingdom, with deceit. Go ahead.
But Judah yet ruleth with the Most High.
But Judah yet ruleth with the Most High, and what?
And is faithful with the saints.
And is faithful with the saints. With this time, Judah was still operating under the Most High. But that also would change, as we covered in the past few weeks. Okay? But dealing with Ephraim, we're going to go back to the book of 1 Kings, or 2 Kings, the 17th chapter, to document the captivity of the people of Ephraim. Before we go into the Apocrypha, as well as some secular history to show you that this is documented and kept even in secular records. When we say secular, that means worldly. That means records outside of the Bible. Okay? Just general history. 2 Kings 17 to 17. In fact, 17 to 16.
And they left all the commandments of the Most High their power, and made them molten images, even to calves, and made a grove, and worshipped all the hosts of heaven, and served Baal.
These are the same exact 2 calves that were being worshipped and set up by Jeroboam. Go ahead.
Verse 17. And they caused their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire.
So they started dealing with child sacrifice amongst the northern kingdom. Child sacrifice became the normal custom amongst our people. Okay, go ahead.
And used divination and
And they
enchantments,
dealt with divination and enchantments. Go ahead.
and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Most High, to provoke him to anger. Therefore the Most High was very angry with Israel, and removed them out of his sight.
We know that means that he moved Israel out of the land. Okay? Because the Bible tells us that the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. So there's no way you can totally remove out of the sight of God. So in this case, when it says that he moved them out of his sight, it means he moved them out of his land, which is Israel. Go ahead.
There was none left but the tribe of Judah only.
And we resolved that understanding. Judah was the ruling tribe that was left, but under him was Benjamin and Levi. Go ahead.
Verse 19. Also Judah kept not the commandments of the Most High their power.
But Judah also went off and started dealing with the same sins as Ephraim. And the Bible tells us that Judah was even worse, because the king of the northern kingdom forced them to worship these gods. But it tells us that the people of Judah forced their kings to worship the idols and the gods. Okay? So it says that we were worse. Go ahead.
Also Judah kept not the commandments of the Most High their power, but walked in the statutes of Israel.
But it says they walked in the statutes of Israel. What were the statutes of Israel?
Worshiping the golden calf, divination,
What else?
divination, enchantment, and spells.
Right? There's one more big one. You got the 2 calves, the divinations, and the enchantments. There's one more big one.
Child sacrifice.
The child sacrifice. Right. So when it says that Judah also walked in the customs of Israel, it's speaking about the divination, the enchantments, the child sacrifice, and the 2 golden calves. Correct?
But walked in the statutes of Israel, which they made. And the Most High rejected all the seed of Israel.
So eventually he rejected all Israel, both northern and southern kingdom. Correct?
And afflicted them, and delivered them into the hand of
They
spoilers.
delivered them into the hands of spoilers. They went from captivity into captivity until when?
Until he had cast them out of his
And
sight.
so eventually he cast them out of his sight. So we went through Babylon, we went through Medo-Persia, we went through the northern kingdom, went through Assyria, we went through Greece, we went through Rome, to eventually 70 AD. We were totally removed out of this site. Now the first time we were removed out of this site was when? Speaking about the southern kingdom. What was the first time we were removed out of the site? The first captivity, the first major captivity. Babylon. Okay? And before that, you had the northern kingdom, which was what?
Under Assyria.
Assyria. Right. So that was the first major captivity in which they were removed out of the site. Right? Now, you have some, as we're going to go into also, remind me, you had some who went to the Americas, and you had some who returned back to the land of Israel. Okay? So all of the northern kingdom didn't make their way to the Americas. Some stayed in the lands of Mesopotamia and Assyria and those different areas, and some eventually went back into Israel. We're going to show you that also in the Bible. Okay? Let's go on to let's continue reading.
Verse 21.
Done.
For he rent Israel from the house of David.
Right. You read that history. Go ahead.
And they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king.
Go ahead.
And Jeroboam drave Israel from following the Most High, and made them sin a great sin.
Right. So Jeroboam made the northern kingdom sin the great sin that we just read. Go ahead.
For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam.
What are the sins of Jeroboam?
The 2K.
The golden calves,
The
child sacrifice, divination, and enchantments. Right. Those are the sins of Jeroboam. Go ahead.
Which he did, they departed not from them, until the Most High removed Israel out of his sight, as he said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day.
So it says, as he said by all his servants, the prophets. So when you look at the prophets like Hosea and some of the other prophets, which were prophets specifically to the tribe of Ephraim, even though they included Judah in some of those prophecies, you had prophets which were dedicated to Judah, such as Daniel, such as Ezekiel, such as Jeremiah. Isaiah dealt with both, because Isaiah was he was before the split of the kingdom took place. Or no, he was before the northern kingdom was taken out. But he prophesied the northern kingdom as well as the fall of the southern kingdom. Okay? And then you had other prophets like Hosea mainly, as well as others, who, and Micah and all those other prophets who dealt with the northern kingdom. So when it says, read that part again, where it says as he said by all his servants, the prophets, speaking about the prophets we read about in the Old Testament, they all went to the northern kingdom and warned them what would take place if they didn't repent. They didn't listen to the prophets. Therefore, they were taken into captivity. Okay, go ahead.
Verse 24. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cutha, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel.
Right, so false nations, as we know, were placed in Samaria, right? False peoples were not the original children of Israel. Okay? Now let's go to the book of Chronicles, and let's show that some of the tribes eventually made their way back to Israel during the time of Hezekiah. And then we're going to show where the other tribes later went into the Americas before we go into some of this history. Okay? So we're in the book of 2 Kings. I believe we're at the 20... I believe it begins at 28. The Chronicles. Let's get straight to the point. I believe it's chapter 30. Chapter 30, verse 1. 2 Chronicles 30 and 1.
2 Chronicles chapter 30, verse 1. And Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah.
So Hezekiah was the king of Judah, who reigned long after the split had taken place. Now it says, Hezekiah sent to all Israel, meaning the northern kingdom, and Judah, which is the southern kingdom. What?
And wrote letters also to Ephraim and to Manasah.
So he wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasah, showing that during the time of Hezekiah, you still had remnants of the northern kingdom. Go ahead.
That they should come to the house of the Most High at Jerusalem, to keep the Passover unto the Most High power of Israel.
Right. So he beckoned them to come back to Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover, like we used to do as a nation in old times. Hezekiah was trying to bring the nation back together. Okay, go ahead.
For the king had taken counsel, and his princes and all the congregation in Jerusalem, to keep the Passover in the second month.
Now, why is it in the law that someone would keep the Passover in the second month? We know that the Passover is the first month, but why are they trying to keep it the second month? What was the law in the Old Testament concerning Passover if they couldn't make it to the first month? Read on, it's going to explain.
For they could not keep it at that time.
They couldn't keep it at that time. They couldn't keep it in the first month, the initial Passover. Why?
Because the priests had not sanctified themselves sufficiently.
Because they were not cleansed sufficiently. So in the Old Testament, there was a law. If you were either on a journey or if you were unclean, you could not keep, and if you couldn't make it to the first Passover in the first month, you had to show up to the Passover in the second month. Okay? So this is why under Hezekiah, they were seeking to keep the Passover in the second month. Okay? And remember, it says Ephraim and Manasah. These are the two main tribes we're covering today. So they're being also called and asked to come to this Passover under the order of King Hezekiah. Well, let's see the response of Ephraim and Manasah. Go ahead.
Neither had the people gathered themselves together to Jerusalem.
Right, so they didn't make it in Jerusalem in time to make the first Passover in the first month. Go ahead.
Verse 4. And the thing pleased the king and all the congregation. So they established a decree to make proclamation throughout all Israel, from Beersheba even to Dan.
Even unto Dan. So Beersheba is the most southern extremity, or the most southern region of Israel, and Dan is the most northern. Speaking about the whole Israel of the whole 12 tribes. So when it says from Dan to Beersheba, that means all 12 tribes, out of all the 12 regions or all the 12 lands. Go ahead.
That they should come to keep the Passover unto the Most High power of Israel at Jerusalem. For they had not done it of a long time in such short as it was written.
Right.
In such sort as it was written.
Right. So they didn't do it in such a long time as it was ordered in the Old Testament. Go ahead.
So the post went with letters from the king and his princes throughout all Israel and Judah, according to the commandment of the king, saying, Ye children of Israel, turn again unto the Most High power of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel.
So Hezekiah was trying to turn the nation back to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He was trying to do away with all the idol worship and all the child sacrifice and all the divination and the enchantment. Okay? He was trying to bring us back together as one. Go ahead.
And he will return to the remnant of you that are escaped out of the hand of the kings of Assyria.
Now let's jump down to verse 10.
Verse 10. So the post passed from city to city through the country of Ephraim and Manasah, even unto Zebulun.
Right, to show you that Ephraim, Manasah, and Zebulun remnants were still in Israel, even after the split. Okay, go ahead.
But they laughed them to scorn and mocked them.
But they laughed them to scorn and mocked them. So they mocked Hezekiah and his messengers. He said, man, we ain't going back and dealing with you guys. We're not coming back under the house of David. We're fine exactly where we are. Go ahead.
Verse 11. Nevertheless, divers of and Manasah and of Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem.
Right, so you had different, it's a small remnant of Asher, Manasah, and Zebulun who went down into Jerusalem to worship and operate to celebrate the Passover under the order of Hezekiah. Okay, so some of them humbled themselves, but the majority said, no way. Okay, we're not dealing with Jerusalem no more. We're two separate nations, right? Now let's go into the Apocrypha. 2nd Ezra 13, to show how Ephraim and Manasah made it into the new world. And then we're going to go into some history. You can start at verse 39.
2nd Ezra chapter 13, verse 39. And whereas thou sawest that he gathered another peaceable multitude unto him.
The other peaceable multitude being a part of the prophecy of 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter. There was another peaceable multitude which was gathered by Christ when he returned. Who is this peaceable multitude? What?
Verse 40. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king.
Hosea the king, which was the king of the northern kingdom at the time of the captivity. Go ahead.
Whom Salmanasseh the king of Assyria led away captive.
So Salmanasseh the king of the Assyrians led them away captive. This is a king that can be found in secular history. Okay, so this is not no fairy tale account of the 12 tribes of Israel. Shalmaneser is a real king in real history. Okay? Proving that the 12 tribes of Israel are a real people. Go ahead.
And he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel.
The other land being what? Which land? The land of Assyria. That's the other land. Go ahead.
Verse 41. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen.
So in this other land, being the land of Assyria, they would leave the multitude of the nations. Go ahead.
And go forth into a further country.
And they would go forth into a further country. A country outside of Assyria. Go ahead.
Where never mankind dwelt.
And this land, according to the Bible, would be a land where never mankind dwelt. So out of all the lands of Genesis, the 10th chapter, under which the children of Noah were scattered, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, this land would not be inhabited by any of those children. This would be a new land, not inhabited by any of the sons of Noah. Okay? Go ahead.
Verse 42. That they might there keep their statutes which they never kept in their own land.
Right, and there's history to show that the inhabitants of the Americas, when they got there, remained under the commandments of the Most High. So the initial reason why they went was to keep the commandments which they never kept in their own land, and when they got there, they kept the commandments. Okay, go ahead.
And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow passages.
Right, go ahead.
Of the river.
Through the narrow passages of the river. Go ahead.
For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood.
So the Most High showed many signs and held still the flood. Before then, many explorers could not make their way over to the Americas. Okay? But the Most High allowed the northern kingdom to make it. Go ahead.
Till they were passed over.
Go ahead.
For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half.
It took a year and a half to get to this further country, where never mankind dwelt. Go ahead.
And the same region is called Asaret.
And the name of this region is Arsaret. Okay? Arsaret, which means hidden or another land. It's a composite of two Hebrew words, Acharah or Ratazah, which means another land. Ratazah meaning land, Acharah meaning another. Okay, go ahead.
Verse 46. Then dwelt they there until the latter time. And now when they shall begin to come, the highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they may go through. Therefore sowest thou the multitude with peace.
So they're coming back the same way they got into that land, okay, by means of ships. All right? Now, let's go into some of the history of these peoples in the Americas. Okay? We're going to start off with Manasah. All right? We're going to start off with Manasah. In fact, we're going to start off with some history on Columbus and what he found when he came to the Americas. In fact, how did he find the Americas? Because many people think that when Columbus went to do his exploration, his initial achievement was to attempt to prove, something to the effect that he was trying to prove that the earth was round and not flat. Or we found out that the earth was round and not flat. And his initial expedition and exploration was supposed to go into India. But instead he happened upon America. And when he got there, that's why he erroneously called the people there Indians. Okay? I believe Indian is a derivative of indigenous. So that's a lie. We're going to show you, according to history, that he did not believe that the earth was flat and that he just happened upon a new land and just erroneously called the people a erroneous name. We're going to go into Lost Tribes in the Promised Lands by Ronald Sanders. Okay? And before we read this, we're going to read a reference from a website titled www.ctlibrary.com. Okay? Again, www.ctlibrary.com. All right? And on this website, they have the following quote. I want you to read this concerning the idea of the earth being round and not flat. Because that's the excuse they use, right? But let's see what they have to say on this topic first.
Contrary to legend.
Done.
Contrary to legend, Columbus did not sail to prove the earth was round.
So contrary to legend, so the idea that Columbus was traveling to see if the earth was round is a legend. So what they're saying is contrary to that legend.
Most educated Europeans.
Read that again.
Columbus did not sail to prove the earth was round.
So he wasn't sailing to prove that the earth was round. Why?
Most educated Europeans and mariners already knew that.
So many Europeans at the time already knew that the earth was round. In fact, if we can get it out of the Bible, according to the Bible, the earth is round. Let's get Isaiah 41 and 22. Isaiah 40 and 22. Okay? So that's a lie. Isaiah 40 and 22.
It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth.
The what?
It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth.
So it says, it is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth. The earth is round. The Hebrews understood it. Many people at the time of Columbus understood it. Okay? So what was Columbus's true agenda? Let's read on.
Contrary to legend, Columbus did not sail to prove the earth was round. Most educated Europeans and mariners already knew that. Columbus estimated the size of the Atlantic Ocean partially from reading his Bible.
Reading what?
His Bible.
His what?
His Bible.
So Columbus estimated the size of the earth from reading his Bible. Okay? You mean to tell me the Bible is not a scientific, geographical, historical record? This is what Columbus used as a map to find the New World. Okay? Go ahead. But they can't tell you that. The Bible was used to find America, but then come around and tell you that the Bible is a fairy tale book and it's not scientific. They can't do so. Okay? So they have to create a lie of Columbus and how he stumbled upon America. Okay? Go ahead.
And if I can say something on that too,
Go ahead.
the fact that he was able to get some kind of measurement before he set sail,
Exactly.
enabled him to make the right provisions on the ship so he can survive the journey.
Exactly. So the measurements he got from the Bible was so exact that he was able to properly measure the time it would take to get from Europe over into the Americas. Okay? So it wasn't thrown off by 30 meters, 100 meters, okay, 100,000 square miles. He got there exactly, and he was able to measure it before he set sail. Just want to tell you, go ahead.
Keeping in mind too, Esau is a cunning hunter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you got to put that into consideration also. Go ahead.
Columbus estimated the size of the Atlantic Ocean partially from reading his Bible.
Go ahead.
He had read in the second book of Esdras.
Now, which book did he read?
He read this one.
The one that nobody likes to read, right? Or the one that people claim is not spiritually inspired. Let's show him the book that he read.
He read this one.
That one. Okay? The book of 2nd Esdras out of the Apocrypha, the same book you claim is not spiritually inspired and doesn't belong in the Bible. It's the same book that Columbus used as a map to find the Americas. Okay? So my question is this. In fact, I'm going to save that question for later. Okay? Let's finish reading this.
He had read in the second book of Esdras in the Apocrypha that the Most High created the world in 7 parts.
So in the Bible, it tells you that the world was created in 7 parts. It tells you the exact measurements and the exact division of the earth in the Apocrypha. Go ahead.
6 of them dry land, and on the 7th water.
Go ahead.
He thus calculated that the ocean separating Portugal from Japan or Japan
Go ahead.
was 1/7 of the Earth's circumference, or about 2,400 miles. He figured that by sailing 100 miles per day, he could reach the Indies in 30 days.
So he had the exact measurements before he set sail. All from using the Bible. Okay? But yet this book don't matter. It's a joke book. It's a fairy tale book. There's no science. There's no history. Right? Now let's go into the Lost Tribes and Promised Lands. Page 77 to 78. Okay? A striking element. In fact, let's start up here, which says he kept a book of prophecies. Right.
Okay. This is page 77 of Lost Tribes and the Promised Land by Ronald Sanders.
Right.
Second line on the second paragraph of page 77. He kept a book of prophecies.
Speaking about Columbus, go ahead.
In which he collected quotations, mostly from the Bible.
And he used this book of prophecies to collect quotations from the Bible. So he had this book open, a book called the Book of Prophecies, and he would take quotes from the Bible and scribe them in this book. These were his personal notes. Go ahead.
Often those dealing with isles far off.
So he was fascinated with the idea of isles or lands afar off. Remember, this is around 1492 in which the Renaissance is taking place. It's at its height. So now Edom is coming back into its power. He's being reborn into the earth. So now he's becoming fascinated with these lands on the other side of the world. Okay? Why? Because biblically, the children of Israel would be in these lands. Okay, go ahead.
Often those dealing with isles far off, that seemed to prophesy his own discoveries. His personal copy, still in existence today, of Pierre d'Ali's Imago Mundi.
Right, so you had an author by the name of Pierre d'Alis who had a book called Imago Mundi, which means image of the world. Okay, go ahead.
A kind of Christian Plinian synthesis of world geography, contains numerous notes handwritten in the margins that are of a similar religious import.
Right, so in this book you would put notes. The same way you have a Bible or a book, you put your notes in the margin just to keep up with things. Columbus did this with his copy of Pierre d'Ali's Imago Mundi. Okay? So he would take this geographical book and put scriptures in it. Okay? Go ahead.
D'Ali was one of the writers who convinced the young Columbus that the western route to the Indies must be fairly short. But the strength of his influence on the latter seems, judging from the notes, to be largely due to the pious factor.
So D.I. convinced Columbus that he could eventually make it to the New World, to the Indies. All right? Let's jump down to a striking element.
A striking element in Columbus's geographical religiosity is his intense and abiding interest in the fourth or second book of Esdras.
So it says Columbus's geographical religiosity is intense and abiding interest in the fourth or second book of Esdras. So Columbus was fascinated with the book of second Esdras. Go ahead.
The two apocryphal books of Esdras purport to be additional writings by and about the Old Testament Ezra. But the second or fourth book is a piece of full-fledged Hellenistic apocalyptic writing that was often regarded with suspicion by the church. And just as
they claim to be Hellenistic writings that were written after Ezra during the Hellenistic period under Alexander the Greek. We know that's a lie. Okay? We know that those records, even though they may have been rescribed or rewritten during the time of the Hellenistic period, the original copy of Esdras was written by the prophet Esdras himself. Okay? Go ahead.
Was often regarded with suspicion by the church, and just as often embraced by the heterodox. Augustine had given guarded approval to Ezra's prophetic claims, and much was always to be made of this by the latter's defenders, including Columbus. In the marginal notes to Columbus' copy of D.Ali is a relatively lengthy discourse on 2nd Esdras 6 and 42.
So again, it makes reference to his copy of D.Ali's, which is a book of geography. And in this book, he makes many references to 2nd Esdras. Go ahead.
Which reads, "Upon the third day thou didst command the waters should be gathered up."
So now, before we read this is the exact scripture out of 2nd Esdras that Columbus used to find his way to the New World. Okay, go ahead. I will read that 2nd Esdras 6. Go ahead.
"Upon the third day thou didst command that the waters should be gathered up in the 7th part of the earth. 6 parts thou hast dried up and kept them, to the intent that of these some being planted of the Most High and tilled might serve thee."
Right. Go ahead.
This was often to be cited by Columbus, who argued that since only 1/7 of the world was water, a good deal more dry land than yet was known remained to be discovered overseas. But Columbus seems to have found more in Esdras than just this geographical argument.
Now, they said that Columbus found more in Esdras than just a geographical argument. So it was deeper than just finding a landmass. Okay? With him finding a new landmass, a question arises. If this land is the same land that's being documented in the book of Esdras in the Bible, and the Bible tells us that the children of Israel would go into this new land where never mankind dwelt, Columbus had to come to the conclusion that the people that were in this land prophesied in the Bible were no other than the children of Israel. Who else could they be? The same Bible and the same record that he used to find a new land documents these same people who went into the new land. Who else could the people be? Okay? Are they Japhetic agents? No. Scriptures never said that agents would go into the new land where never mankind dwelt. Okay? Are they Hamitic? No. The scriptures never mentioned the Hamites going into a land where never mankind dwelt. Okay? It only leaves the children of Shem, and in particular, the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. Okay? A portion of those tribes would make their way into this land, the same land that Columbus is reading about in the book of 2nd Esdras, the 6th chapter. Okay? Is there any more on that? Now let's jump down where it says Israel has thus split. It says in his marginal notes, I'm going to read it here, it says, but Columbus seems to have found more in Esdras than just geographical argument. You there?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Here is one of the things he writes about this verse in his marginal notes.
So along with this verse, he had a precept for it. And he wrote notes based on this precept. Go ahead.
But this prophecy is not accepted by the reprobate Jews, yet it has been accepted by the innumerable ones among them who have believed in the gospel.
This is what Columbus wrote in his marginal notes. Go ahead.
Israel has thus been split into two branches.
He says Israel has thus been split into two branches. Why would Columbus write that Israel was split into two branches along with the prophecy of a new land? Along with the prophecy of a new portion of the earth that has not yet been discovered. We know that Israel being split into two nations is synonymous with the captivity that eventually led to the northern kingdom making their way to the Americas. They both go hand in hand. Columbus understood this. Okay? Go ahead.
A division predicted as inevitable by the prophet Samuel to King Saul.
So it says it was an inevitable prophecy predicted by the prophet Samuel to King Saul. We know later it was prophesied by Ahijah to King Solomon. Later the prophets were sent to tell the kings of both Israel and Judah that eventually, if they did not repent, they would also be scattered into another land. And there you have the northern kingdom in the Americas. When Columbus got there, he did not stumble upon Indians. He stumbled upon people such as Ephraim and Manasah. Okay? Let's get some more history on Ephraim and Manasah. Okay? Let's get some more history on Ephraim and Manasah. Now, there's more information on Columbus that I wanted to get. I wanted to go in here, see the relationship with the blacks and Jews, showing that Columbus himself was a so-called Jew. He was a false Jew. Okay? And then pairing that up with the information which many of us may have not come across, going into the conquest of Jerusalem. Okay? So part of Columbus's mission, after he went into the Americas and pillaged the Americas, to rob the native peoples of their gold and their resources, was to go into Jerusalem and to take the land of Jerusalem for Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. So part of his conquest was not just to take down the native tribes in the Americas, but also to come back to the old world and take over Jerusalem. To show you that the so-called Jews were looking to take Jerusalem back then, under Columbus. But the prophecy was not yet set. It was not yet time for them to take Jerusalem. So they did not prevail. Okay? They're showing you the link between the Jews of old and the Jews of today. Okay? You can read that under the history of the conquest of Jerusalem. Alright? Now let's go into some of the things that befell the native peoples when they made their way over to the Americas. And there's a lot of history we can go into. In fact, this is thousands of years of history, so it will take us days on end to touch on every intricate part. Okay? But just to touch on some last key parts, this is a record called before we get this, I'm going to get another one. Okay? This is a record titled, let me get the title here. I believe this is called The 10 Tribes Historically Identified with the Aborigines of the Western Hemisphere. Alright, the title of the book again is The 10 Tribes of Israel Historically Identified with the Aborigines of the Western Hemisphere by Barbara Simon. So what does that mean? That the 10 tribes are historically, so according to history, the 10 tribes are identified as the Aborigines of the Western Hemisphere. What is the Western Hemisphere? North, Central, and South America, along with the Caribbean islands. So they're telling you right out that the people who are there, according to history, are identified as the 10 tribes of the nation of Israel. As we showed you in the book of 2nd Ezra, how they got to the Americas. Okay? And now let's go ahead and inside this book and let's go into the section on Haiti. Because we know the Caribbean islands were initially inhabited by the original tribes that got there. Before Levi got there, you had Simeon as well as Ephraim and Manasah inhabiting these lands of the Caribbean islands. In fact, we're going to jump over to the record on Bartholomew de las Casas, because there's so much information you can go through in this record. But basically, they go through the traditions, they go through the language, they go through the food, the customs, they go through almost everything extensively, showing you the link between the peoples of Peru, the original peoples of Haiti, the Mexicans, so on and so forth, and how their customs link back to the ancient Israelites. Okay? But we're going to jump over to a record called Bartolome de las Casas, a brief account of the destruction of the Indies. Basically, he was a priest who made his way over to the New World during the same time that Columbus and the conquistadors were over in the New World, destroying the natives of the land. Okay? In fact, to read something on that, I'm going to go here. And this is now going into the fact that the archers would destroy Ephraim, as it tells us in Genesis 49 chapter. Okay? American Holocaust gives us a number of how many people were murdered and slaughtered in the New World. Okay? And it makes a comparison to one of the most devastating events, and I guess we would call human history, which is Hiroshima and Nagasaki, saying that the devastation of Hiroshima was nothing compared to the devastation of the people of the West Indies. Speaking about Ephraim and Manasah. Let's go here. Just 21 days.
Just 21 days after the first atomic test in the desert, The Japanese industrial city of Hiroshima was leveled by nuclear blast.
Just to mention the page, this is in the prologue. It starts at 9 and it's carrying over into page 10. Okay, go ahead.
Never before had so many people, at least 130,000, probably many more, died from a single explosion.
Speaking about Hiroshima, right?
Just 21 years after Columbus first landing in the Caribbean.
So 21 years after Columbus landed in the Caribbean. Remember, just 21 years. Okay, many of us have not even lived for 21 years. Okay, or just finished 21 years of age. It's not a very long time. Go ahead.
The vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola.
So he changed the name of the land to Hispaniola. Go ahead.
Was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people.
Nearly 8 million people. Nearly 8 million people. Go ahead.
Those Columbus chose to call Indians.
Those who Columbus chose to call Indians. Because if you call us anything outside of the name that God gave us, you can do anything you want to us. Because we don't have our true identity. Okay? Now, if it was documented that he destroyed 8 million Ephraimites and Manassites, that rings more of a devastation. Okay, or that calls for an outcry amongst the earth, okay, and amongst nations. But if you just say they were Indians, what are Indians? Okay, what identity and custom do they have? In fact, they were sending reports back to Spain stating that these people were savages, that they were cannibals. Okay? So that gave them all of the power they needed and all of the excuses they needed to destroy these people in the New World. Go ahead.
Those Columbus chose to call Indians had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas.
So what happened in Hispaniola was the equivalent of 50 Hiroshimas. Imagine that. I was just seeing on Russia Today the other day that they were doing a documentary on Hiroshima and the destruction that took place. And yes, it was a horrible thing that happened to the Japanese on the day that the Americans dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. But it tells us that according to history, it would take 50 Hiroshimas in order to equate to the devastation that happened to our people in the Indies. Okay? Now let's go into this record here. This is a priest, Bartolome de las Casas, who documented the history that took place with the people of the Indies. Now, the damning thing about this, first of all, there was an outcry by him. He stated that horrid things and horrible things were happening to the native peoples, which was true. But he stated that as a result, instead of enslaving the native people, let's now go into Africa and get the Africans and bring them over to the Americas. So his solution was not to stop killing and destroying people. It was to go get the rest of the tribes of Israel and bring them over into the Americas and destroy them also. Okay? Fulfilling the prophecy where it tells us in Deuteronomy, the 33rd chapter, let Judah be brought unto his brethren. So Judah would eventually come by way of cargo slave ship to meet his brethren in the New World. Okay? We're going here, it states, you can read this.
America was discovered and found out in 1492, and the year ensuing inhabited by the Spaniards.
Now, when they say discovered, it was discovered by the Spanish in 1492. There were people already in the Americas before the Spanish got there. Okay? So it wasn't discovered in 1492. It was discovered by the Spanish in 1492. Go ahead.
And afterward a multitude of them traveled thither from Spain for the space of 49 years.
So for 49 years, people were traveling back and forth from Spain to the West Indies. Go ahead. Jump down.
We found so well peopled with natives and foreigners that there is scarce any region in the universe fortified with so many inhabitants. But the mainland or continent distant from this island, 250 miles and upwards, extends itself above 10,000 miles in length near the seashore, which lands are some of them already discovered, and more may be found out in the process of time. Mm-hmm. And such a multitude of people inhabits these countries that it seems as if the omnipotent God has assembled and congregated the major part of mankind in this part of the world.
So he said there were so many people in the Americas that it seems that the omnipotent God had gathered these people and brought them to the New World. We just read that in the book of 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter. Okay? God did bring them over to the New World and gather all these people into this region. Okay? Go ahead.
Now this infinite multitude of men are by the creation of the Most High innocently simple, altogether void of any averse to all manner of craft, subtlety, and malice.
So they were naturally a good people. Okay, they didn't have any subtlety or malice. They were naturally innocent and pure people. Go ahead.
And most obedient and loyal subjects to their native sovereigns.
Go ahead.
And behaved themselves very patiently.
They were very patient people. Go ahead. Such as their father Joseph. Go ahead.
Submissively and quietly towards the Spaniards, to whom they are subservient and subject, so that finally they live without the least thirst after revenge, laying aside all litigiousness, commotion, and hatred.
Right. Let's jump down. They are parsimonious.
They are parsimonious in their diet, as the Holy Fathers were in their frugal life in the desert, known by the name of Ephraimites.
Right, so they were very frugal in their diet. Okay? They weren't, I guess you would say, a gluttonous people. Alright? They were very frugal in their diet. Go ahead.
Alright, jump down.
Yeah, jump down.
Very apt to receive the instilled principles of Catholic religion.
Go ahead.
They are so transported with zeal and fervor in the exercise of ecclesiastical sacraments and divine
Ecclesiastical
service.
means priestly sacraments. Ecclesiastical means priestly. Okay? Go ahead.
That the very religiosos themselves stand in need of the greatest and most signal patience to undergo such extreme transports.
Right, so they were so religious as a people, so spiritual, that even the people who sought to convert them into Catholicism could not match them in spirituality. Okay, go ahead.
Spaniards?
Yep.
The Spaniards first assaulted the innocent sheep.
So it says the Spaniards first assaulted the innocent sheep. And it says sheep with what? A capital S. Okay? And yes, they are the sheep, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Go ahead.
Like most cruel tigers, wolves, and lions, hunger starved.
So they were like hungry, starved lions upon the indigenous people of the native Indies, or the West Indies. Speaking about the conquistadors, the conquerors. Go ahead.
Whom they have so inhumanely and barbarously butchered and harassed with several kinds of torments.
So they tormented and tortured these people, butchered these people. They have images in the book American Holocaust, which shows you hanging these people about their necks and burning them, okay, with fire, sicking dogs upon them, okay, coming up with games and new ways to kill the children. You have men who would stand afar and see which one had the best aim with their rifles. And they would use that in order to kill and shoot off children. Okay? All types of torments and tortures that you can't even imagine were taking place amongst the people of the West Indies. And people talk about satanic ritual abuse in this society. What took place with the people during both slavery as well as the colonization that took place under conquistadors was a high level of satanic ritual abuse. Rape, murder, torture, all things you would find in a satanic ritual was being done unto these people. Check out these images. Okay? These are the sorrows that took place upon the peoples of the Americas. Now we have to balance this with the reality. The reality is what? That God sent these people to the New World. Columbus would have not been able to go into the Bible and find that history in Ezra concerning the earth and how to get to the Americas if the Spirit of the Most High wasn't on him to go into that record. The Most High put a spirit on Columbus to do that, to make his way to the Americas, to eventually destroy our people, to fulfill the prophecies. Okay? So we have to bring that balance to the discussion. Okay? Go ahead.
Whom they have so inhumanely and barbarously butchered and harassed with several kinds of torments, never before known.
So they said these torments were never before known. Okay? Things that you never even heard of were being done to the inhabitants of the West Indies. Go ahead.
Or heard of, which you shall have some account in the following discourse, that of 3 millions of persons which lived in Hispaniola.
So Hispaniola is where you have both Haiti and the Dominican Republic. That's Hispaniola. Go ahead.
There is at present but the inconsiderable remnant of scarce 300.
So initially there were 3 million people on the island of Hispaniola. They were later brought down to 300. From 3 million people to 300. Think about that for a second. From 3 million to 300. What is that, 10%? It's less than 10%. 1%. 10% would be what, 3,000? Okay? 1% of the population was left after they were finished. Go ahead.
Nay, the Isle of Cuba.
Now it's going into the island of Cuba, the children of Manasah. Go ahead.
Lies now uncultivated like a desert.
Now it's uncultivated like a desert, whereas before it was like a paradise. Go ahead.
And entombed in its own ruins. You may also find the Isles of St. John,
a Caribbean island, if I'm not mistaken, where Ephraim and Manasah also dwelt. Go ahead.
And Jamaica.
And Jamaica, the original peoples of Jamaica, Ephraim, some remnants of Manasah. Go ahead.
Both large and fruitful places.
Both large and fruitful places. Initially, go ahead.
Unpeopled and desolate.
Unpeopled and desolate. They were totally depopulated. Go ahead.
The Lucayan Islands on the north side, adjacent to Hispaniola and Cuba, which are 60 in number or thereabout, together with those vulgarly known by the name of the gigantic isles, and others, the most infertile whereof exceeds the royal garden of Seville in fruitfulness, a most healthful and pleasant climate is now laid waste.
So it says, a healthful and pleasant climate is now laid waste. It became a wasteland. Go ahead.
And uninhabited. And whereas when the Spaniards first arrived here, about 500,000 men dwelt in it, they are now cut off.
So initially there was 500,000 men on the island. Go ahead.
They are now cut off.
They are now cut off. They were exterminated. Okay? By who? The conquerors. Who made way for the conquerors? Christopher Columbus. Okay? Go ahead.
Some by slaughter, and others ravished away by force and violence.
So some were killed by slaughter, and some were killed by violence, fulfilling Bible prophecy. The Bible tells us that those that would not be taken by violence or by the sword would be taken by famine. We're seeing this taking place with the destruction of Ephraim and Manasah. Go ahead.
Others ravished away by force and violence to work in the mines of Hispaniola, which was destitute of native inhabitants.
Right. Go ahead. So they were also taken into slavery, in other words. Okay? All right, so a few more things and we'll close out. So he goes into the history of the kingdoms that existed in the New World before Columbus came, and then he goes into the destruction. Okay, similar to American Holocaust. The only difference is that he was actually there at the time that these things took place. Okay? Of the Isles of St. John in Jamaica. In the year 1509,
in the year 1509, the Spaniards sailed to the island of St. John and Jamaica, resembling gardensa and beehives. With the same purpose and design, they proposed to themselves in the Isle of Hispaniola to perpetrating innumerable robberies and villainies as before, whereunto they added unheard of cruelties by murdering, burning.
So these are the cruelties that were enacted by the conquerors. Robbery, it says cruelties by murdering, go ahead. Burning, roasting,
and exposing men to be torn to pieces by dogs.
And exposing men to be torn to pieces by dogs. Go ahead.
And finally, by afflicting and harassing them with unexampled oppressions and torments in the mines. They spoiled and unpeopled this country of these innocents.
Now I'm going to read this before you go any further, because he keeps mentioning that the things that took place with them and the things that happened to them were unheard of. Now there's two things I'm going to get out the Bible to go along with some of these prophecies. Okay? Let's go into the book of Daniel. Chapter 9. And let's start at verse, let's see here. Daniel 9 and 12. Okay?
And he hath confirmed his words, which he spake against us,
Okay.
and against our judges that judge us, by bringing upon us a great evil.
Right. So the Most High confirmed all the words of his prophets and his judges by bringing great evil upon us. This is the prophet Daniel speaking. Go ahead.
For under the whole heaven have not been done as have been done upon Jerusalem.
Have not been done as have been done unto Jerusalem. So people talk about other people going through pain and struggling and hurt and captivity. Yes, that is true. But none of that pain, hurt, and captivity can be equal to that which had been done to the people of Israel. And when we read this, it's telling us that they went through some of the most horrible things that have never been heard of on the face of the earth. This is Bible prophecy being fulfilled. Okay? I want you to read on here. I'd like to get another scripture out of the Bible, which makes into what we're reading. Where?
Whereunto they added unheard of cruelties by murdering, burning, roasting, and exposing men to be torn to pieces by dogs, and finally by afflicting and harassing them with unexampled oppressions and torments in the mines. They spoiled and unpeopled this country of these innocents. These 2 isles containing 600,000 at least, though at this day there are scarce 200 men to be found in either of them.
So these 2 islands, St. John and Jamaica, which initially had 600,000 men, it says you can barely find 200 of the original inhabitants. You can barely find 200 of the original inhabitants to show the devastation that took place by the conquerors. Okay? This is all Bible prophecy. Okay? Let's go to Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. All right? Deuteronomy 28. Where it says you shall be left few in number. Right? Let's start at verse 25.
Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 25. The Most High shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies.
So he would cause us to be smitten before our enemies. That's why these people, which Joseph or Ephraim and Manasah, being great warriors, were not able to fend themselves against the conquerors. The Most High, by divine revelation and through His Spirit, allowed them to be overtaken. He says He would do what?
The Most High shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them.
You will go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them. You will not be able to defend yourselves against your enemies. You're going to try to go out and fight against them, and they're going to cause you to scatter and flee. Okay?
And shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth.
And shall be removed into all kingdoms of the earth. That's what happened to us. Even though we went there of our own will into the new world, we got there initially, or we came up with that plan in captivity in Assyria. So even that idea of going into a new world was contrived in captivity, being scattered. Go ahead.
Verse 26. And thy carcass shall be meat unto all fowls of the air.
And our carcasses did become meat unto the fowls of the air. Into what?
And unto the beasts of the earth.
And unto the beasts of the earth. The dogs is one of those beasts who they use to tear us to shreds. Okay? Go ahead.
And no man shall fray them away.
And no man shall fray them away. Go ahead.
The Most High will smite thee with the botch of Egypt, and with the emerods, and with the scab, and with the itch, whereof thou canst not be healed.
They're speaking about diseases. Okay? Let's jump over to the book of Leviticus 26 and 22. And I mentioned diseases because that was one of the main ways that they used to depopulate us. Okay? By murder, famine, violence, and disease. Okay? So all of this is Bible prophecy coming to pass. Leviticus 26 and 22.
I will also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children, and destroy your cattle.
So it says, I will send beasts among you that shall rob you of your children. One of the tactics that they used that we just read was what? Sending dogs among us and allowing us to be torn to shreds by dogs. Okay? Bible prophecy. Go ahead.
And destroy your cattle.
Destroy your cattle. That happened also, especially with the Native American Indian. Go ahead.
And make you few in number.
And make you few in number. Going from 600,000 in population to what? 200. Going from 500,000 in population to what? Nothing. 0. Going from 300,000 in population to what? 300. You shall be left few in number. All of this we're reading is Bible prophecy that took place with Ephraim and Manasah. All right? One last thing on Cuba, and we'll close out. Okay? Going back into the devastation of the Indies by Bartholomew de las Casas. Go ahead.
In the year?
In the year 1511.
In the year of our Lord 1511, they passed over to Cuba.
So in 1509, they went to Jamaica and St. John. In 1511, 2 years later, they went into Cuba. Go ahead.
Which contains as much ground in length as there is distance between Valladolid and Rome, well furnished with large and stately provinces and very populous, against whom they proceeded with no more humanity and clemency.
So even though these people were civilized, they had a large, vast empire, a large, vast land, had things which were a semblance of civilization, the conquerors nonetheless destroyed these people the same as they did their brethren a few years earlier. Go ahead.
Or indeed, to speak truth with greater savageness and brutality. Several memorable transactions worthy of observation passed in this island. A certain Cacique, a potent peer named Hackney, who not long before fled Hispaniola to Cuba for refuge from death or captivity during life, and understanding by certain Indians that the Spaniards intend to steer their course thither, made this oration to all his people assembled together. You are not ignorant that there is a rumor spread abroad among us of the Spaniards' arrival, and are sensible by woeful experience how such and such, naming them and Haiti, so they term Hispaniola in their own language, with their inhabitants, have been treated by them, that they design to visit us with equal intentions of committing such acts as they have hitherto been guilty of. But do you not know the cause and reason of their coming?
They replied,
We are altogether ignorant of it. They replied, but sufficiently satisfied that they are cruelly and wickedly inclined. Then thus he said, they adore a certain covetous deity, whose cravings are not to be satisfied by a few moderate offerings. But they may answer his adoration and worship, demand many unreasonable things of us, and use their utmost endeavors to subjugate and afterwards murder us. Then taking up a cask or cabinet near at hand, full of gold and gems, he proceeded in this manner. This is the Spaniards' God.
So we concluded that the Spaniards, this is one of the indigenous peoples, who concluded after he fled from Hispaniola to Cuba, that the God that the Spaniards worship is none other than the devil. And he concluded this based on the fact that the only thing that the Spaniards were satisfied with was murder and bloodshed. And after they had murdered and destroyed the people totally, they would take the resources, the gold and the gems, and they would take it back to their country. So he said that this is what they do in order to reverence and worship their God. Okay, which was true. Go ahead.
And in honor of him, if you think well of it, let us celebrate our octos, which are certain kinds of dances and captains used among them. And by this,
we're going to jump down. In fact, you know what? We're going to leave it there because there's so much. As you can see, there's so much information here. But we're going to leave it there with this week's information concerning Ephraim and Manasah. We first went through the biblical history of Ephraim and Manasah, where they were born, going back to ancient Egypt. We went into the history of their captivity and how they eventually got to the Americas, as well as the later devastation that took place in America. Again, there's much more history that we could cover on this topic, but we're going to leave it there. I'm going to say to you all, we hope you enjoyed the lesson and were edified. At this moment, I'm going to answer a few questions if you have any questions, and then we'll conclude tonight's lesson. Okay?
Esau, like, how did Esau's seed like stay like red? If he's the only red person on earth, like shouldn't if he had a wife or one and they had children, shouldn't they come out like a little darker? How did his children still stay red?
It's a good question. Very good question. Okay? So the question is, how did Esau remain red? Okay? How did Esau remain red? Let's go to the book of Jeremiah 46 and 28.
46,
In fact, let's go because that is a very good question. In fact, let's go to the book of 2nd Esdras first. 2nd Esdras 6 and 9. Surely Esau would be in existence in these latter days, that he would retain his initial and original state in these last days. There's another scripture I'm going to give to show you that the Most High will preserve the nations throughout the four corners of the earth. So no nation in this earth would lose their natural characteristics. Okay? Especially Edom, because he never experienced a captivity like we experienced captivity. So for example, let's get Hosea 7 and 8 with Ephraim and Manasah, or Ephraim. Got it? Go ahead. This is one scripture we didn't get in the lesson, but we should read this. This is very important. With the diversity that exists amongst Ephraim and Manasah, as well as the other 10 tribes. Go ahead.
Hosea 7 and 8. Ephraim hath mixed himself among the people.
He says he had mixed himself amongst the people. So Ephraim through captivity will become mixed. Therefore what?
Ephraim is a cake not turned.
Is a cake not turned. Okay? Explains the diversity of colors that exist amongst Ephraim. Okay? Go ahead.
Strangers have devoured his strength.
Strangers devoured his strength. Go ahead.
And he knoweth it not.
And he knoweth it not. Go ahead.
Yea, great hairs are here and there upon him, yet he knoweth not.
Right. So because he mixed himself amongst the nations, his strength is destroyed. He's no longer the original, I guess you would say, complexion that the Most High made him. He's now scattered amongst these nations with a diversity of colors based on where he's been scattered. Okay? Now, dealing with how this relates to Esau. All right? Let's go to the book of 2 Ezra 16. 2 Ezra 6.
Me?
Yeah.
And he said unto me, from Abraham unto Isaac, when Jacob and Esau were born of him, Jacob's hand held first the heel of Esau.
Go ahead.
For Esau is the end of the world.
For Esau is the end of the world. Go ahead.
And Jacob is the beginning of it that followed.
Jacob is the beginning of it that followed, showing us that Esau would be in his power in the end of the world. And he wouldn't be in a state in which he no longer has his original characteristic of Genesis, the 25th chapter. He would be the original Esau that existed from the time of birth. Okay? Now, further information on this. Okay? Further information. Because you have some who have mixed themselves amongst the people also, who have taken on some of the characteristics of the nations. Then you have others who are of the higher echelon of Edom, who don't mix themselves amongst the nations, who stay amongst themselves. You understand? So they would be preserved all the way down the line. They understand that there's others outside of them that have mixed themselves amongst the tribe of Israel, who in the last days would cleave to the nation of Israel. Let's get the book of Isaiah, the 14th chapter.
Isaiah 14?
14 and 1 through 2.
Isaiah chapter 14, verse 1. For the Most High will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land. And the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. And the people shall take them.
It says they shall what? They shall cleave unto who?
The house of Jacob.
So you have many nations that would cleave to the house of Jacob. Some who would also mix themselves amongst the house of Jacob. And they would also take on features that the house of Jacob possessed. You understand?
I understand that. What I was originally asking, like for instance today, if an Edomite was to have an Israelite wife and they have a child, that child would still be like what's so-called mixed race.
Yeah.
You feel me? So
it wouldn't be mixed. It would be whatever their father is.
I know that, but I'm talking about what they
You're
call
talking about the features.
Yeah, the features. Like, it
Right.
would still be a little dark. You feel
Right,
me?
exactly.
So I'm saying, like, how back then, if he was the only Edomite, like, he's the only one that complexion,
Oh,
how
I know
did it
what
come?
you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? Like, how did it come to where?
It was the, the Canaanite.
Right. The Canaan, how he mixed himself with the Canaanites, but still remain of the same complexion.
Yeah.
Well, we've been doing the research and trying to get to the history of how the Canaanites were cursed with leprosy. And through that, when Esau mixed himself with them, they remained their original complexion. But still we know, and I'm trying to find this scripture in particular, that above all of that, the Most High would set him as a separate nation in the earth. And he, like all the other nations, would remain and maintain their complexion and their characteristics and their features. Okay? So, for example, if Esau, one of his generations, mixed with the people of Canaan, all of his children wouldn't possess those features of the Canaanites. They would all come out and they would still possess the features of their father Esau down the line. So you have one generation that looks like Canaanite or part Canaanite, and the rest of the generations later would maintain the original features of Esau, if that makes any sense. Okay? So like for instance with us, you may have one of us who may mix with another nation, and that original generation may look like that nation we mixed with. But down the line, we still produce darker children. It doesn't affect the whole nation going down the line. You understand what I'm saying? So the Most High made it so that where all nations would maintain their lot in the earth, and their nation and their characteristics and their features in the earth. Now going back to what I stated earlier, with us is different because we've been subject to captivity to the point where we've been watered down, so to speak. You understand what I'm saying? Any more questions?
Please help answer the question.
It could go into that, but in fact, read that real quick. Read that. That is a good point. Revelations 12 and 3.
Revelations chapter 12 and verse 3.
So Revelations 12 and 1 speaks about the woman and the 12 stars, representing the woman being Israel, the 12 stars being the 12 nations which descended out of the house of Israel. Right? Now we're speaking about this dragon, this empire that will come in the last days. All right? Revelations 12 and 3.
And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon.
A great red dragon. That red is identifying what? Edom. This would be an empire ruled by Edom. So in the last days, we still have an empire which is identified as the great red dragon. To let you know that Edom, as we read in 2nd Ezra, the 6th chapter, would be ruling in the last days. And he would maintain that original identity trait that he was born with in Genesis, the 25th chapter. So that wouldn't change regardless. Just like all the other nations. They would maintain their original lot, their inheritance, their features, their culture, their customs, and their physical characteristics. Okay? We're the only ones that haven't retained those things. All right? Due to captivity. Anything else?
Pretty much verse. Having 7 heads and 10 horns.
Right. Speaking about the Roman Empire. Go ahead.
And 7 crowns upon his head.
Right. Right. Any more questions here? Okay. Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Based off on that same question,
Mm-hmm.
like when we used to rule in England, and how did some of our last names get transferred over to the Edomites, like the Stewart, Swaff, you know what I'm saying? Those
Right.
type of names. How did the Edomites end up taking over the names in England?
It's a very good question. And the answer to that is, number one, when we went into Europe, we came in under identities such as Anglo-Saxons and those types of identities. And we have history to show that those people were Israelites originally, right? And they were the creators of the English language. So when we went into England, same way when we went to other regions of the earth, we started picking up different dialects and different languages, and we added that as a part of our culture. So when we started taking on those names, you're now speaking about later when we became conquered, and other nations started taking on those names.
Right.
So for example, after King James passed away, his son Prince Charles, which later became King Charles I, was murdered by Oliver Cromwell. Okay? So later, you would have families who would come after they distorted history, because the only way that, well, let's get the book of Genesis, the 27th chapter. The only way that Edom would be able to maintain in the earth and establish his rulership as well as his way in the earth would be through war and conquest. Okay? So Genesis, the 27th chapter and the 43rd verse. Genesis 27 and 43.
27.
Right. That would be the only way he would be able to establish himself in the earth. So, for instance, when he went over into Europe, before we were in Europe, this is going back into ancient history, for example, when he went over into Europe under Zepho, the son of Esau, he eventually started naming himself and calling himself after the name of the peoples that were in that land, such as Macedonia. You had Haman, the Agagite, which was an Amalekite, but in the book of 2nd Ezra, he's called the Macedonian. Let's get that also. Okay? Let's get out of this verse, Genesis 27.
Okay, Genesis 27 and 38.
Mm-hmm.
And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above.
Mm-hmm.
And by the sword shalt thou live.
And by the sword shalt thou live. So he would survive through the sword. Okay? He would take down nations and take over kingdoms by the sword. Now when he takes down these nations, he not only takes over the land, he takes over the identity of the people. Let me give you some examples. Psalms, I know what we're talking about, where it says he calls the land after his names. That's going into how people go into a land and they name the land after their name. So for example, America Vespucci went over to America and named it after himself, America. But this is now going into how he goes into a land and takes the identity and the name of the land and places it upon himself, while distorting the history of the original people. Let's go to the book of Maccabees. In fact, the rest of Esther. Salaki, the rest of Esther 8. The rest of Esther, chapter 9, verse 24. And this is in the Apocrypha, KJV Apocrypha, right after the book of Judith, and right before Wisdom of Solomon.
That's the Esther chapter 8.
Let me see there. In fact, let's go to 16 and 10. The rest of Esther 16 and 10.
For Aman, a Macedonian.
For Aman, a Macedonian, now in the Bible he's identified as an Agagite. The Agagite is a king seed, or the king seed of the Amalekites, right? But in here he's being called a Macedonian. The original Macedonians were what? They were Japhetic, right? So he went into a land of Japheth, and he took on the identity of the people of Japheth, which at this time was Macedonia. Same thing with Alexander the Greek and his father. Okay? Where it says they came out of the land of the Macedonians. Even the term Greek. Greek, the original Greeks were what? Japhetic. But later, Esau began to label himself as the Greeks. Okay? And the Khazarian Empire, he labeled himself as also either Turkish or Japhetic. So a lot of people go into history and they say that, well, the Khazars were Japhetic. No. It was Esau in the land of Japheth taking on the name of the Japhetic people. Okay? So they did the same thing to us when they went over into Europe and started taking on those names. King Charles, King George, all those different names they hold now, which were originally people of color. Hey, Israel. Who's labeling themselves as the Israelites nowadays? Okay?
Isn't the name Stewart, wasn't that derived from black anyway?
Right, Stewart simply means black. It goes back to the German word Schwarz, which means black. Okay? You can read that up in Nature Knows No Color Line. Okay? King James's family name was what? Stewart. They were the house of Stewarts, the house of Schwartz, or the house of black. Okay?
Even the queen, so-called Queen of England today, like their so-called
Elizabeth, right?
Their so-called name is their family name is supposed to be Windsor, but their real name, they're Germans. It's Glaxo something. It's a German name. It's not even their name. So.
Exactly. And even the original Queen Elizabeth was of color. Was a woman of color. Just to show you the repeated history of how they go into a place, they destroy the people, rewrite the history, and take the identity of the people. Okay?
On the identity, not to beat a dead horse, but
Yes.
on the identity too. You know how you see the olden style dresses in the olden days with the back on the dresses.
Right. Yeah.
Women used to have something where the dress would flow over it to mimic what our sisters have anyway.
Right, naturally. Right. Just to show you how they
take on the customs of what they're trying to hide themselves as.
Right, exactly. That's
the first one.
Yeah.
Aside from Jacob favoring Joseph, are we supposed to have a child that we love more than another?
Aside from Jacob favoring Joseph, are we supposed to have a child that we love more than another? And we can attack that a few ways. When we examine, let's get the law first, right? In fact, we're going to take it above the law. We're going to take it with the Most High. Does the Most High have a child that he favors the most? Let's get Deuteronomy 7:6. I was going to go into the law. If a man had two sons with two separate wives, the one loved and the other hated, he's still supposed to give the inheritance to the oldest son. Just to give an example that people did have sons and children whom they favored. Same way the Most High has a child who he favors in the earth. It's not supposed to operate to the point of total hatred and the spirit of total disregard for your other children. It's not like Jacob hated the rest of his sons. He loved the rest of his sons, but he favored Joseph. Joseph was his favorite because he had him in old age. That's a natural thing. Okay? Let's do Deuteronomy 7:6.
For thou art an holy people unto the Most High thy power.
Holy itself, Kodash in the Hebrew means to be separate, to be sanctified. Go ahead.
The Most High thy power hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth.
So the Most High has a special or chosen people. Okay? Now, did he choose this particular people just so we can boast and say that we're the chosen? No. He chose us so that we can be a light to everyone else, all the other children whom he had created. Okay? The Most High has many children, but he chose one to be a light to the rest. When you break down into the nation of Israel, he chose Levi to be a light within the nation of Israel. All Israel couldn't be the priests and say that we're children of God too. Why can't we officiate in the priest's office? The Most High had a favorite within Israel that he would choose to deal with the priesthood. He had a favorite that he would use to deal with the kingship. Okay? These are just examples to show that even God himself has some level of, which we call favoritism. But his favoritism is guided and ruled by the commandments, not by just feelings and emotions. Okay? Let's get 2 Ezra 6:54.
Second Ezra chapter 6 and verse 54. Consider thou therefore also how that ye are less of stature than those that were before you. And so...
54? 54?
Excuse me. 54. Second Ezra chapter 6 and verse 54. And after these, Adam also, whom thou madest Lord of all thy creatures.
So Adam was made Lord over all creatures. Go ahead.
Of him come we all.
Of him come we all. We're all children of Adam. Go ahead.
And the people also, whom thou hast chosen.
And the people also whom thou hast chosen. So out of all the children of Adam, Most High chose one as his favorite, so that we can be a light to the rest of the people of the earth. Okay? Let's sit on that. Yep.
someone says, if all the tribes sinned against the Most High, breaking commandments and performing child sacrifice, why is it that only Dan got removed forever?
We're going to go into that when we go into the information on Dan. We haven't forgot that study going into the history of Dan and why they were separated as a tribe of Israel. We're going to go into that in full detail when we touch on Dan. What was the second part?
Also, how did Columbus know that the tribes had so much gold, and why is gold so sought after when it has very little use? Is there a spiritual connection?
Well, number one, when Columbus made his way over to the Indies, he noticed that the people had mineral resources. The same way today, when people go over, or when they went over to Africa, they found that Africa had certain resources that they could use in order to run their empire. Okay? A good thing to look into would be the scramble for Africa. When they went into the Belgian Congo, they noticed that they had rubber, which was able to produce tires. Okay? At that time, the tire industry was booming because now you had the new car industry. So they saw that in Africa and decided that, listen, we're going to take this as a portion and we're going to enslave the people so that they can produce rubber for the car industry. You do the same thing everywhere they go. Same way they know that the Middle East is rich in oil and how they seek to control the Middle East because of its richness in oil. Thirdly, on top of that, as we showed earlier, these people are divinely inspired by Satan himself. Okay? So Satan give them the lowdown before they go into a landmass to destroy it and take it down. These are the resources that's in the land. And if you think I'm just being facetious, if we go into the book of Revelation, the 12th chapter, it'll tell us that Satan leads them into these different regions of the earth to destroy and conquer. Okay? Revelations 12, and let's get verse 6, right?
Revelations 12 and verse 6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of the Most High, that they should feed her there 1,260 days.
So we fled into Africa. How did the serpent, or how did the people of the serpent eventually find us in Africa? Let's go to the book. Let's jump down to verse. Let's jump down to verse 15. And the serpent sent out the flood.
Verse 15. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman.
So he sent out his lies after the woman. How? By his missionaries. Go ahead.
That he might cause her to be carried away of the flood.
So they first go into the land. The missionaries spy out the land. They go back and say, well, look, this is what we saw amongst the people. We saw their customs, we saw what they eat, and we saw the mineral resources that exist amongst them. After the missionaries are finished, then comes the military. Okay, so this is how they're able to do it, and Satan is guiding them the whole way. They're not just walking into a place and just finding people, just happening upon people. Satan is telling them exactly where to go to find these people. Okay? Now, why is there a value in gold? The Most High, according to the Bible, speaks about gold as being a precious metal. Okay? Before all the things we see, before the paper money, gold was the finance of choice. Okay? The Bible tells us that the kingdom shall have streets of gold, to show that gold is held in high esteem amongst the precious metal. So there is some value to gold. It's just that the people in control of the gold and the gold trade and silver trade can, switch up the value, and I'm pretty sure Brother Rawchaa can go deeper into it, but they can inflate and fluctuate the value of the gold as they want to. Okay, so 1 week it could be worth, it can be very expensive and very valuable. Next week, they can cause it to drop to a point in which it's dirt cheap. You understand? So that's why gold varies in this society, but it is a precious method. Next one.
So it says, all praise to a higher, great lesson, elder, in the time of the Gentiles fulfilled. Of the time of the Gentiles fulfilled. Someone says, was it...
the times of the Gentiles are not yet fulfilled. Their time is coming to a close, but it's not yet fulfilled. They're still in Jerusalem. It says that Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Jerusalem is still being trodden down. Go ahead.
Someone says, was it white people who did all these horrific things to the sons of Ephraim and Manasah?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
If so, should we let them dwell among us to do this to us again?
Let me hit you up with this one. I'm going to give you one level of this to, it's going to cause you to ponder. Okay? Let's get the book of Isaiah 11.
Yep.
Because I'm going to hit you with this. Number one, the reason why, as we mentioned earlier in the lesson, that the Most High allowed Esau to do what he did was because of what we did against the Most High. Number one, we would have not been in America if it wasn't for our iniquity. We got over into America because what? We sinned against the Most High. He took us into captivity in Assyria. It was in Assyria, a land of our captivity where we were because we sinned against God, that we came up with the idea to go into the Americas. We got over into the Americas. Initially, we thought to serve the Creator and honor His laws. Later, we started going off. I'm pretty sure you've seen Apocalypto. I'm pretty sure you've seen some of the images from the ancient burial grounds of our people in the Americas and seen some of the idolatry and the sacrificing we were dealing with. So because of this, the Most High allowed them to come and destroy us again. Same thing with our people in Europe. Europe, when it was ruled by Israelites, was not a harmonious kingdom under the Most High. There was strife, there was envy, there was jealousy and war all throughout that. So the Most High eventually allowed them to come and destroy that. Now, here's my question. Let's read this in the book of Isaiah 11 and 13.
Isaiah 11 and 13. The envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim.
So who are the adversaries of Ephraim and Judah? Go ahead.
Ephraim shall not envy Judah.
Ephraim shall not envy Judah, to show you that there's envy between Ephraim and Judah. So should we not dwell amongst Ephraim because they envy Judah? Go ahead.
And Judah shall not vex Ephraim.
Judah, until this day, is vexing Ephraim. We're warring against each other. We got gangs in which we're murdering each other and killing each other. Does that mean that we should not dwell amongst each other as a nation of people? No. So how can we look at the other nations and say that they shouldn't dwell against us because they committed heinous acts against us, when we commit heinous acts against each other, but yet we say, come back together, ye tribes of Israel? Okay? Let's get another one. Let's get Amos chapter 8, verse 6. This is speaking about Ephraim also.
Amos what? Amos 6?
Amos 8 and 6. In fact, let's get Amos 2 and 6. Read that.
Thus saith the Most High, for 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they
So these are 4 sins of Israel. Speaking about the northern kingdom. And it says what? Because they did what?
Because they sold the righteous for silver.
They sold the righteous for silver, and what?
And the poor for a pair of shoes.
And the poor for a pair of shoes, to show you that yes, we were selling each other into captivity before we went over into the Americas. Before we went into captivity. Amongst each other, we were doing each other wrong and giving each other over into captivity. Okay? So should we not come back together as a nation and dwell amongst each other because we did these things to each other in the past? We still ask for the 12 tribes to come together. The Bible tells you that the nations shall cleave to Jacob. Thus saith the Lord. So who are we to say who can come amongst us and who can't? When the Most High says that the nations shall cleave unto us. That's something you should ponder, Brother John Boyce. Okay? Next one, yeah. We're going to answer a few more before we close it out.
Someone said, thank you, brothers, for all the hard work and the Most High's guidance and love putting this lesson together. May the Most High keep and bless you all in leading his laws towards his will and righteousness through his son, Yeshua. Someone says, Shalom, Elder Lawya and Rawchaa, great blessings to you. Someone says, the word for the edifying lesson, Shabbat Shalom, family, wa barakatan.
All praise to the Father.
Someone says, for the slaves from the tribe of Judah that were taken to Puerto Rico, that may now speak Spanish and call themselves Puerto Ricans, aren't they still Judah?
They're still Judah, exactly.
Isn't there still a lot of Judah in PR?
Right, there's Judah. The tribes are scattered all throughout the Americas. The 12 tribes information more so shows where they are predominantly, but there's tribes all over throughout. I mean, you got Ephraim in America, you got Issachar in America, okay? You got Gad in America. Just because you're in America don't make you Judah. It's just shown where we went in mass number. But we migrated up and down, or we're taken, better yet, up and down the North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean islands. Okay?
Someone says, are you allowed to drink water whilst on a 7-day fast?
It depends. If you're doing a liquid fast, then yes. But going on a 7-day fast, I would really be careful. It's not to discourage you, but you really have to ease yourself in and really prepare yourself to deal with 7 days. That's not something you can just pop up one day and just off the muscle, just say, I'm going to go for 7 days without food and water. Okay, you can seriously hurt yourself. So I suggest you really prepare yourself before you decide to do so. Try with liquid and things of that nature, or try first dealing with fruits and things of that nature, and then ease yourself into a 7-day fast. Don't just jump right into it. Go ahead.
Can you show how the so-called white are Edomites?
That's a whole lesson within itself. But just to give a quick summary, the Bible in the book of Genesis, the 25th chapter, gives us the birth of Edom. And it gives us some of his identity traits. It tells us that he was born red as a hairy garment, or red all over as a hairy garment, giving you the complexion of Esau. It speaks about how he ate the pottage of lentils that was undone. Okay, or the red pottage as it was undone. Hebrew 12:6 tells us that Esau sold his birthright for one morsel of meat, to let us know that there was meat in the pottage. Another characteristic of Edom, okay, rare food. The Bible speaks about how Edom would receive the blessing of warfare and weaponry. That's another identity trait for Edom. Okay? There's many identity traits and much history throughout the Bible we can go to prove who he is according to the Bible, as well as secular history, but that's a whole lesson within itself.
Last one is, how come Dan is the only tribe that the Most High will not accept back?
And again, we're going to go into that in our lesson when we go into the book, the tribe of Dan. Okay, I believe it's actually in the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, where it actually states that Dan would be reckoned as a Gentile. Okay? But we're going to go into that in detail in a later date. Maybe we'll go into it in this thing on the 12 tribes. Okay, who knows? But we will touch on Dan in a later date. All right? So with that, I'm going to say bless you all and shalom. May you all enjoy the rest of your Sabbath. Brother and Elder Rawchaa will be with you a bit later to finish off the rest of the Sabbath with the law class. For those who are in the academy, we will be seeing you tomorrow. So with that, say, bless you and shalom.